Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Alder. It's like coffee with an analyst, but there's no actual coffee. Each episode, we interviewed an expert in the field of law enforcement analysis to share their career-defining stories and to get their insights on the world. Please join us on recognizing and learning from these brilliant minds as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has over 20 years of law enforcement analysis experience. She was the chair of both the IACA election committee and a 4-time chair of the conference committee. She's been an analyst in Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York. She is currently the web intelligence analyst at Cobwebs Technologies. Please welcome Allison Sullivan. Allison, how are we doing?
Oh, we're doing great, Jason. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited about this opportunity and joining some other esteemed colleagues that have been on here before. Thank you.
I almost did it. I almost called you Allison Mayer, but I had to read my notes. So
it's something that I guess precedes me. You know, sometimes when you take the leap and go into the married world, you forget about that maiden name that, you know, you've had for so long in your professional career. But I went from Mayer to Sullivan, and I'm happy to be here as a Sullivan.
Yeah, it was funny because yesterday I was going through and I was trying to remember what your maiden name was. Like, for some reason yesterday I couldn't remember Mayer, and then today it was stuck in my brain. So
yep, you know, some people used to call me Mayer, and that was my nickname, and now they've got to go to a multi-syllable Sullivan. So we'll see what comes out of that. We'll see if we get any mergers of the two.
Mayer Sullivan does sound like a character in a storybook or something like that.
Sure
anyway,
does.
So let's go back in time and discuss how you discovered the law enforcement analysis profession.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a long, long time ago. In terms of crime analysis, I kind of got into the field by mistake. I'm not sure that a lot of people really can say that, but I got my bachelor's degree from Northeastern University. And for those that are familiar or not familiar with the school, it's a 5-year program so that you do half education in the classroom and half education in the workforce. So half of my time was spent doing what they call a co-op. And I worked at a law firm, I worked at an insurance agency, and I got the opportunity to interview with the Cambridge Police Department. Being a criminal justice major, they obviously try to keep you in that field or in that realm. So when I interviewed with Cambridge PD, they had 3 positions open for an intern. One was the Detective Bureau, one was the ID unit, and one was the Crime Analysis unit. Now, I'd never heard of crime analysis. I had no idea what it was, but having, you know, watched some TV shows, I'm like, oh, the ID unit sounds great. I bet I'll be, you know, drawing chalk-like outlines of bodies and, you know, sampling the blood splatter on the wall. I thought it was this, you know, really, really cool position. And after going through the interviews, they had just essentially assigned me into the crime analysis unit. About 20 years later, here I am, kind of fell into the position and I loved it. You know, just looking at crime from a totally different perspective, looking at policing from a different perspective, and looking at the community from a different perspective was a really cool challenge. And I really, really enjoyed it. I was an intern there for about 2 years. You know, after my internship ended, I stayed on part-time. And then eventually when I graduated from college, I was hired as their full-time crime analyst. And then from there, I guess you could say the rest is history.
So when you were in college, what did you want to be?
Funny. I wanted to be an attorney. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to argue. I wanted to argue with people. So it's funny because there was a law class that I took as an undergrad, and I think a week or 2 into the class, I said, no way, this is not for me. You know, so it was actually a good thing that I took that class and learned that I didn't want to waste all those years and all of that money going down that path and not be happy.
So you didn't even take LSAT?
Oh, no.
Okay.
I'm lucky I finished the course.
Yeah. So it was in the same boat. I thought I wanted to go on to law school, and I actually took LSAT. And I actually interned in undergrad at a law office and decided that wasn't for me. Took me a little bit longer than you, but I eventually came to the same conclusion as you.
Yeah. And, it's good that we had that experience because, like I said, you don't go and waste that time and waste that money and waste that energy just to realize 20, 30 years down into your career that you're just not happy.
Yes. So then talk briefly about you as an intern at Cambridge, maybe those first couple months. What do you think of when you think back?
Oh man, I was wet behind the ears. I sure was. I was intimidated by everyone, all the officers, all of the bosses, even my supervisors. I didn't know what I was doing. Going from textbook and learning definitions of everything relative to the criminal justice system as a whole, and then going here and reading reports and, victims, telling us about how their house was burglarized. And now I have to try to find certain MOs and things coming out of that report and trying to identify whether or not it's part of a pattern or trying to remember what sector it was in the city and entering our reports manually into our homemade Microsoft Access database and using map info at the time to plot all those crimes. And it was a whole different world. And it was really challenging and it was really cool to kind of see the different view of looking at crime from that perspective. And it was really interesting to see that, what I would now call our customers, it wasn't just the officers knowing where to be deployed or the, patrol ship commanders knowing where to allocate their resources in order to prevent crimes or things like that. But it was also people like real estate agents and potential residents looking to move into the city. They would call and say, what's the crime like in this neighborhood? What's the crime like over here? And sometimes it was my responsibility to talk to them and give them some information. And, we were so public facing in that unit, where being a really, really heavily community involved department, that was something I didn't expect as an intern to go into a position like that. I realized that there would be so much resident facing opportunities.
Yeah, that you got me thinking a little bit, but so yeah, because we came up about the same time.
Mm.
We're talking about early 2000s. And really before crime mapping online came popular, the police departments did have a lot of public records requests that they had to respond to. So that was a big portion. And of course, some agencies left that to the crime analysis unit. I hadn't thought about it in quite a long time, but yeah, so that is true that those public records requests were busy work that we once had to do.
Absolutely. And, the actual door to our office was at the top of the staircase in the old headquarters building. And, you were allowed to go to the front desk on the first floor and ask for crime reports and things like that. And citizens would walk up to the second floor and request them. And we did quarterly and annual crime reports. So not only as an intern was I surprised to learn about all of those resident and customer facing requests, but we got a lot of experience writing, explaining the different temporal patterns that we had seen. So in a quarterly crime report that we would put together might be a 50, 60 page book that we would actually offer to the citizens. So having the capability to go in there and actually write about that, how creative can you get with your writing in terms of pickpocketing trends? And, I remember, and now I'm going to date myself, but Christopher Bruce may remember teaching me what an actual Slim Jim was, because back then, as an intern, we were talking about the different MOs and Chris teaching me how to, kind of maybe categorize certain things and different descriptions that you can give while writing reports and things like that. And, he's like, oh, do you have your series with Slim Jims being used to break into cars? And I was like, how does a Slim Jim get used to open a car? I mean, I'm thinking, Macho Man Randy Savage with the commercials. And I'm like, what? Lo and behold, we're not talking about the same kind of Slim Jim. But
Yeah.
when I said that to Chris, he's like, "Oh man!" But again, I was wet behind the ears. A 19-year-old, 20-year-old intern there, learning about all these different things. Yeah, I definitely learned some things.
Interesting. And so that 40
Yeah.
or 50 page book you talked about, that would be printed out and physically handed to residents?
Yes. So we had a team of people that would write these books. And my supervisor, Rich Zaveri, he would, had a very profound background in, I'm looking for the terms of writing.
Journalism?
There we go. Yeah, he had a background in that. And, he was really, really great at being descriptive and trying to get his staff and his interns, trying to think like that and open up a little bit, not necessarily think of things just like a textbook. But, every year we'd have a contest for people to submit ideas for the front cover of our annual report. And, I still have them. I still have some Cambridge quarterly reports from 2001, 2002, and our annual ones. I think it was the 2002 book. It was a local artist that drew a picture of Harvard Square and the people in it. And that was on the cover. So yeah, there's some fond memories of how I got my base experience there at Cambridge PD.
Yeah, I am really hoping to get Rich on the show. So I'm planning to corner him at the IACA conference in Vegas.
Absolutely. You got to get Rich at the bar, have him, buy him a White Russian, have him tell you some stories. He's got a lot of them. And I got to say that, a lot of people in the IACA are now involved as part of the internship program from Northeastern and going through Cambridge. I mean, even Chris Bruce, that's how he came up as well. So it's really cool to see the influence that Rich has had on so many of us in the field.
Yeah, it's a great program.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in the prep call that Rich gave you quite a compliment the one time. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, he did. So I just tried to be a sponge when I worked with Rich and just learn everything from him, because he could walk in a room and tell you about the past patterns and the past, most prolific arrests we had for different house breaks in a certain neighborhood. And he knew it all. And I tried to learn as much as I could from him. And I remember when I became the full-time analyst after graduation, I had maybe it was writing a pattern about a pattern or a series, or maybe it was one of our bulletins. But I remember Rich telling me that my writing had improved so much, and I think I blushed. I was so happy, and it was such a compliment from Rich, having the journalism background that he does, and again, trying to find different ways to almost make an article attractive about house breaks, car breaks, bicycle thefts, the property crime that we would have in Central Square. It's really, really hard to, to avoid using the same terminology over and over again. But, he opened up my mind and different ways of thinking. And when I got that compliment from Rich, it was definitely a moment in my career that I remember.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so you move on to New Jersey. Before I looked at your resume the other day, I actually thought you were from New Jersey. I had never knew that you even had a stint in Massachusetts. So I always known you as the Jersey girl of the IACA. So how did you find a path from Cambridge to New Jersey?
Well, believe it or not, it was Rich. I think I was an analyst with CPD for maybe about 2 years or so. And I believe he saw an opening on the IACA's website, awesome resource for job openings. And he said, I know you want to go back to New Jersey, where you're born and raised, and go back to your roots. And he said, there's this opening at New Jersey Transit PD. And I was like, New Jersey Transit? That's the train system and buses. Like, what could they need an analyst for? And I was like, well, wait a minute. Is Rich just trying to get rid of me? Or is he? And,
sick of your writing.
Exactly. That compliment was just a joke. But in any event, it shows that Rich just, with the profession and helping students become adult professionals, that he just wanted me to spread my wings a little bit. And again, knowing that I wanted to be closer to family back in New Jersey, I actually went for it. I took a dive off the springboard and drove down to New Jersey and Maplewood at the time, and interviewed with Transit PD. And there was another analyst there that had just started the crime analysis unit just a few months prior. We were going to be doing Compstat at the department, and that was a little intimidating as well, because we didn't have anything like that in place in Cambridge. And I had always heard, the rumors of Compstat being a very brutal process, and the stigma that had gone along with it in terms of possible discipline and things like that, the ranking officers. So I was a little, what to expect, especially for a statewide transit system. What does their jurisdiction look like? Yeah, I took the leap. I was offered the position and moved back to New Jersey. And I was with New Jersey Transit for a little over 3 or 4 years.
So you mentioned jurisdiction, and that was my question. So you're doing Compstat. Is it statewide where you're covering the transit police statewide?
It is. It's a statewide jurisdiction, and then you have certain portions of the state that have a smaller transit system. So you've got the rail system that goes statewide, But then in other areas like Newark, New Jersey, you'd have a city subway in addition to the rail. So being that it's the largest city in the state, you'd have the subway there to kind of get you from point A to point B that might be 2 or 3 miles away. We also worked a lot with Delaware. Down in Atlantic City, we had another transportation system. So there were a couple of few mini ones within the state. But yeah, the number of commuters a day, I don't even remember what it was back then in the early 2000s. But, fast forward to when I started employment in Manhattan and being a customer of New Jersey Transit, there are a ton of people on their public transportation system daily, going in and out of Manhattan, going, into Newark, New Jersey and taking the Amtrak train to Washington, D.C. It's amazing to see it every day.
So what kind of issues were they targeting?
So there was a lot of homelessness issues staying at the larger transportation hubs like the Atlantic City bus terminal, like Newark Penn Station. New York Penn Station was a beast of its own because there are so many agencies there. We've got Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, NYPD. There's just a ton there. And then obviously following September 11th, the critical infrastructure became a very, very big concentration point because how do you prevent that from becoming vulnerable to something? So that was, I'd like to say more of a broad concern. And I say broad because we had a lot of international dealings where some of our officers went to London after their incident on their transit system and learning from them and what they took away as best practices in terms of prevention and dealing with that emergency situation. So when we would bring it back home, you'd look at things like people trespassing, taking pictures of these transportation hubs. Were they doing it for artistic purposes or were they doing it for criminal reasons? And that's where the officers would try to gain as much information from them as possible. And, we'd have our frequent flyers, as you'd like to say, that there were certain people that were just really big train enthusiasts or train station and historical enthusiasts where they would just really like to take pictures. In order to get great angles, they'd have to go on the tracks. But that's not only a safety issue for them personally, but there's a reason to not trespass on those tracks. And, you don't want to hear the train signal coming behind you, but we have to make sure that, our infrastructure and our employees and also the commuters were safe.
And this brings us to your badge story. And the Analyst badge story is sponsored by Mindy Yoon's Quick Take videos. So check out the second Thursday of every month. Mindy's Quick Take videos is an animated series in which it gives a little helpful hints that are 2 to 3 minutes long. So check those out on our YouTube channel. So then, Allison, what would you consider your career-defining case or project to be?
Yeah, so it actually did happen with New Jersey Transit PD. I was there a little less than a year, and, classes are still offered at the IACA conference about buy-in. 20 years later, we're still talking about this. How do we get the buy-in from our fellow officers? How do we get the buy-in from the command staff? How do we prove our worth, essentially, and show them why we are needed and how we can help? And I think my analyst story, my badge story is actually how I got that. So I mentioned earlier the city subway in Newark, New Jersey, which is a very crime-ridden city, big gang problems, and drug problems. At one point, it was the auto theft capital. But we had our city subway, which you could easily jump turnstiles and, evade fares and all those things. But we had a robbery series going along that city subway. And like most crimes, or some crimes, the more they go on, the more aggressive the actors are. And it eventually turned into a sexual assault. The female victim was able to give a lot of clues to who the people were. There was a group of 3 to 4 guys, almost the same description in every incident. And we had everybody ID'd except for one guy named Bloody J. And to be pretty specific. And, I knew that automatically there was gang relation, those types of things. And using open source and actually DOC records, I was able to identify him. And it was the last missing piece of our robbery series. And we were able to apprehend and charge all of the 4 people involved. This guy that I had identified gave even more information about who their ringleader was and all these other pieces of intel that we gained from speaking with him. And he confessed to everything. And there were no indicators really to go to him, but just by using different pieces of information from the report, that may not be important to a detective or an officer. We kind of, our job is to find that missing needle in the haystack, and identifying that it led me to identifying Mr. Bloody J, and I actually got an award for it from the agency, and it was a pretty proud moment of mine, and I definitely got the buy-in from the detective bureau, from the command staff, and I think I might have been 24, 25 at the time, and to be recognized at such a young age was really, really cool. It was a really cool moment in my career.
Yeah, it's interesting. We do talk about buy-in from time to time on the show, and it makes me think about, from the officer's perspective or an investigator's perspective, with their training, they're taught to put all these pieces together, all these tidbits of information together, and then they always have to sell it, whether they're selling it to their bosses or selling it to the prosecutor, what have you. Whatever they bring forward, they have to corroborate. And with some, it's not until they really see what an analyst can do before they'll take that leap and bring them on board. Because if they're cross-examined or they're going to be questioned on anything, they need to know what it was, what's the source of it. And so I think that's why there is some reluctance from time to time to get analysts involved, or anybody else for that matter.
Absolutely. And, sometimes there is that unfortunate divide between civilian and uniform, and, building that bridge and showing that you're both on the same team, and I'm here to help you and I'm here to help the agency, just to know that there's no risk of their job going away and those types of things. Once we all learn how to play ball in the sandbox and we, all have the same mission, it makes it that much easier and hopefully that much better.
You leave the transit police and you go on to become a criminal justice planner with the East Orange Police Department.
Yes.
Still in New Jersey.
Yes.
So talk about that transition, going from analyst to planner.
So the planner portion of the title, I believe I had 3 or 4 different titles. That was really, it was a new position for a new unit. I would be working in the intelligence unit. At the time, I was just finishing getting my master's degree from Seton Hall. And because of all these other things I brought to the table, the kind of position had to be written a certain way in terms of justifying bringing an analyst on board. Certain cities have certain requirements in terms of going ahead of City Hall and things like that for approval. So that was really just, I'd like to say it's a creative title, but essentially I was doing the same type of work and really wearing 2 different types of hats at East Orange. So East Orange is actually right next to Newark. When I left New Jersey Transit, I was working at their headquarters out of Newark, right near Newark Penn Station. So I was familiar with some of the Newark Police Department's personnel and their analysts, and having brought that relationship over to East Orange was a really good transition helper for me, if that makes any type of sense, because, she kind of mentored me a little bit in terms of working with the command staff and rank and file and with the prosecution processes and prosecutor's office and things like that. And one thing I found really different in New Jersey that Massachusetts did not have is, when it comes to violent crime, homicides, were the lead investigator was out of the prosecutor's office, not the local agency like it was in Massachusetts. So certain things like that, once the homicide is handed over, which we did have a lot of when I first joined the police department, I wouldn't be as involved in cases like that I may have been, for example, again, like a robbery series or a commercial burglary series, things like that.
So it is a real-time crime center. You're dealing with drug trafficking and you're dealing with the HIDTA. So is this more intelligence related?
Definitely. So, when I first joined the department, I came in with a new regime, essentially. My police director at the time, Joe Cordero, was a retired NYPD inspector, and he came to the East Orange Police Department as a civilian police director, and he brought forward things that had worked in NYPD, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It proved true to East Orange. We brought a new philosophy and a new way of being proactive instead of reactive, which a lot of departments just, fall in line with. And that's not necessarily to put any department down or take a dig, but that's just always the way it was. but we brought forward a fresh face. We brought forward new methodologies, and we were able to take a really reactive department and really, really promote the proactiveness, where now, 15 years later, it is still a proactive police department. And my tenure there, I think where the crime dropped about 78% within the first 5 years. And going from an agency that had 26 homicides the year that I joined the PD down to, I believe, 5 my last year there, really shows that, our agency really did a 180. We brought it, Compstat was there. A lot of people became responsible for their roles, including myself and including my unit. So, we started off very tactical. We started off very crime driven in the sense of what can we do to prevent this from happening? What simple fixes can we make? What simple fixes can we offer to business owners or to residents? What kind of crime prevention strategies can we share and become more community involved? And then as those simple, basic things became second nature, then we really shifted to more intel-driven methodologies, keeping track of who was in or out of jail or in or out of prison, working well with DOC and getting those notifications of who's coming back out and when. And, obviously comparing that when that rooftop commercial burglary pattern would get low, our number one target was already in jail. You figure out, okay, well, he's probably responsible for majority of them. And now that we're not getting them, doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why we're not getting as many. In my time there, almost about 12 years at East Orange, it shifted. It really started very basic, as like I like to call old school crime analysis. And we had some other retired NYPD folks within the intel unit that was, again, newly developed when I joined. And it really just started changing the way of thinking and the culture of policing there.
What were some proactive strategies that you all put into place?
Yeah, I mean, directed patrols were a big thing. They became very second nature. If you were not on a call for service, you were on a directed patrol somewhere, so that all of the officers' time was essentially accounted for during their 8 or 10-hour shift. And, we would then track our mapping software, the amount of directed patrols in one area versus the crime. Were they aligned with each other? Were we in the right place at the right time? And we would get down to very minuscule hours, minutes. We'd be very, very granular in tracking things. It would be so particular where we would able to be pull the AVL on the vehicles and seeing where our patrol vehicles were at the actual time of an incident based on surveillance video or burglar alarms, things like that. We were really, really focused in on, and again, this is years later when we were able to kind of trim some of that fat and almost essentially share the news with some of our street criminals that East Orange wasn't playing. You couldn't come here to buy drugs, to sell drugs. There's certain elements in the area that you're not going to remove. Gang culture is something that's within that area that is just very, very hard to eliminate. But there were certain groups of people that, we would debrief people when we would arrest them and get information and know where things were being sold, what pawn shop was getting the catalytic converters, things like that, and sharing that on an intelligence report for myself and other people in the detective bureau would then go ahead and use and complete that intel cycle in terms of using that for proactiveness or talking to shop owners. And did you see this person come here? So we really, really, in terms of what those strategies were, I think we just really got very granular with things and very directed, very exact. And we really tried to make sure that we were doing all we could in terms of prevention from a tactical standpoint, but also just educating the public, educating shop owners. And, a lot of people have the community service bureaus and things like that at their departments. And, our community service bureau not only did things like that, but we also worked with the schools and having our resource officers there. And, we had a lot of juvenile crime, a lot of petty crime committed by them. But then, again, with gang culture and violence in the area, they would get involved in that at a young age.
So you've had a couple of stops here where you're dealing with Compstat. Do you have do's and don'ts that you recommend to folks when the topic of Compstat comes up?
Absolutely. So again, coming from the beginning of Compstat and the beginning of our intel unit at East Orange, retired NYPD being part of the makeup of our department, the Compstat book, when we first started it, and I call it a book, because we would put together information, charts, maps, activity logs, things like that. Our book was like 130 pages. Do not do a 130-page book. Not only are we killing trees, especially when we would have to make 5, 6, 7 copies, depending on how many chiefs we had at the time, but no one reads that. No one has time to read that much. And if the things that really need to be focused on can be able to be put in just a few pages or a few documents, or 5, 6 years later into the Compstat process, we would be able to put 1 or 2 maps up on our overheads in our Compstat room and just have a discussion about it. You know, we would plot our crime, plot the efforts with it, plot calls for service, you know, where our shot spotter locations were, and in combination with who's living where and who's recent released, and looking at all these different information. You don't want to overwhelm your officers or your commanders in terms of putting all that information on one document or one map, but you should be able to really just work with a few things and have a real discussion about it. Otherwise, it's kind of just busy work for the unit, and it's busy work for the officers or the commanders coming in and trying to prepare for that and having all their numbers in line. And, you know, when you walk away from the meeting, you want to have some kind of motivation to take whatever topic you discuss at your meeting and really want to work with it, work on it, get creative in how to bring new ideas to the table to tackle those problems. You don't want to inundate people with just numbers and data and reading all these pages. It's got to be something fruitful, something that really you can work with.
Yeah, I think no matter what office I've worked in, I think it's really hard to keep a weekly meeting from going stagnant.
It is.
It's really tough. Eventually, no matter what you do, the first month or two seems really productive, but it eventually plateaus and gets to the point where you're just not sure that it's very fruitful.
And that's it. And it becomes painful, and people start to dread it. People don't see the point in it, in the sense that it was originally created, regardless of how the agency uses it. It's created to become helpful and serve almost as a communication tool, not only between bureaus, but between shifts, between a night shift, a day shift, a midnight shift. You know, certain commanders would be responsible maybe for an area of the city, regardless of time differences in terms of different shifts. But then some might be responsible for the midnight shift and not going on the day shift. So, you know, there were tons of times where officer or commanders would learn about things at the Compstat meeting. And although that's a good thing that they now are on the same page, that's when I would take a step back and say, well, how do I get everybody on the same page and make them see that it's, you know, a bigger problem than what's going on only in your neighborhood or only on your shift, that just because you clock out doesn't mean it can't happen before or after your shift, and it can't now bleed into your shift. So it was definitely a learning process, and for the whole entire agency, as well as myself as one of the prime analysts really doing the Compstat data, but keeping everybody's attention and excitement could definitely prove difficult, especially when the air conditioning isn't working on a hot summer's day.
Nice. All right. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about your transition to the private sector and even working for a vendor. And of course, we'll bring up the IACA and talk a little bit about that.
Awesome.
You're listening to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Carolyn Cassidy, and I'd like to give some information to you. We've all watched shows on TV where someone comes home and there's been a break-in. Their house is disrupted and possibly items have been stolen. Someone gets on the phone and calls 911. Help, please come. I've been robbed. Okay, let's clarify this. You have not been robbed. You have been burgled. A robbery is a person-to-person crime. A burglary is a property crime. If you are not home when someone comes in and takes something from you, you have been burgled. There has not been a robbery. Hashtag, you were burgled, not robbed.
Hello, this is Brian Gray, and my advice for analysts is don't settle for mediocrity. If you want to be happy in this career, long-term, you can't be a minimalist. Just don't do what you're asked for. Do what you know is right. And don't ever, ever substitute quantity for quality. And if you haven't found a way to put design to work for you, you're not doing your best work.
Welcome back, Allison. I want to talk about your transition to the private sector. So in 2017, you leave East Orange Police Department and started a job with Data Miner in New York, New York.
Oh, what a transition it was. Sometimes when you work in, you're ingrained in the police way of operating. You've got to seek permission for this and seek permission for that and put it in writing. And we used to call them two froms. It would be to this boss from this analyst. But, making that transition to the private sector was a big learning curve. Creativity is encouraged and you're allowed to spread your wings. And some of those liberties really weren't available all the time in the police world. But when I joined Data Miner, I got back on New Jersey Transit. I took that good old train from New Jersey to New York. I was working with a group of really, really talented, educated, bright, God forgive me for saying this, but kids just out of college. This is when you're old. You're calling other people kids, and you still feel like you're one at heart. But anyway, all these recent college graduates that had these amazing backgrounds with, studying international cultures and speaking multiple languages and bringing it forward to this startup company that was really a real-time actionable news outlet in some facets. So a quick background about Data Miner for those that are not familiar with it. Clients would be journalists, entertainment, finance, and then of course government. And that's where I fell into line. I was the manager of the public safety desk, and we would try to alert authorities about any type of threats coming through social media platforms, letting them know what was going on the internet, essentially, keeping obviously some of our secret sauce secret. Our job was really to not only with those self-harm threats, but especially being located in New York and NYPD using our platform, letting them know what's going on the street, what people are taking to Twitter with, what people are taking to Facebook or Instagram with, and letting them know hopefully as sooner rather than later. And, there were certain instances that we were able to get the information over to local authorities based on things that people were saying on different platforms prior to a 911 call. It showed me and opened my eyes to how much really social media is used by different generations instead of the phone and instead of speaking or calling or, letting police know that something is happening. They're putting it on social media. And it blew my mind for the first year. It was a hard pill to swallow. And again, coming from the police world, why wouldn't you call 911? But, different generations deal with things differently. And they would take to Twitter and report it there, essentially. Making that transition and using my analytical background, it was definitely a different vertical that I was in. But with that, a lot of people respected from where I came from in the background and looked to me for guidance on certain things. And how would police want to receive this? What would they do with it? How can we help them? So that's where I really got to bring some of my experiences to the table to make that information even more actionable and really get the right information to police. Because, when people are on there making school shooting threats, are they legitimate? You never know. You always want to take everything seriously. But, if it's coming from the meme account generator or a troll account or things like that, that's when, do we want to waste law enforcement's time? And that's where we, Data Miner, would kind of, take another look at things. Is this bona fide or not?
You mentioned that it was a startup company, and the first thing I think is like, wow, that's a pretty big risk to go from public sector job to this startup company. But at the same time, what a position to be in, because data and social media is so rich and fruitful that, you probably could hire somebody just to watch like the Nextdoor app. There's that much data on just like the Nextdoor app, let alone Facebook, Twitter, and whatnot. So looking back at it now, did you feel that you were taking a great risk when leaving New Jersey?
Absolutely. Because, not only are you taking a risk and getting into a world that you really don't know a lot about, not only in terms of working for a tech company, but now it's considered a startup. Now I'm in New York. I'm with all these people that do not have law enforcement background. I had one partner that came from FDLE, and everything is new. And where certain benefits like, oh, lunch is provided every day. That's great. These are all these little perks that come with it, but it comes with it at a cost in the sense that you're there all day, every day, watching this come forward. You're watching things unfold on the internet, and it's, again, using a different way of thinking that I wasn't used to. And, you take that risk because are you able to fulfill those shoes? Other people joining the company or had been with the company knew what to expect, and I was learning as I was going. And of course, the comfort blanket of, in New Jersey, being part of the pension system, my future for my family and things like that, and now I'm leaving that, where you may be a little bit more protected job security wise in the policing world. Now, when you're going out to private, you're not. You can be let go at any time for any reason, and within, obviously, in a reasonable realm of things, but you're not guaranteed that safety net that some may normally have or otherwise have within the civilian world in policing.
Did this put more pressure on you, would you
Yes.
say? And since it did you work longer hours because of it?
Yes. So I had a 2-hour train commute in and a 2-hour
Oof.
train commute home. Yeah. I really got to know New Jersey Transit very well. But I used a lot of that time for research, listening to podcasts, looking online, how people communicated with hashtags, how things started trending or going viral. And I spent a lot of that time really researching things and trying to educate myself on this whole different world, and not realizing how many people really use these social media platforms, a lot of which I never knew about. I really wasn't exposed to dark web in my previous experience, my previous employment. And now that was a place to learn about, and it can be a very nasty place. And those opening those doors to things I never knew existed it was overwhelming at times. And again, I was at the point in my career where I was looking for that next challenge. I was looking for the next mountain to climb, and I definitely found it. It was a really big transition to make. Although my background was very applicable for my roles within the company, it was a really hard turn to make in the sense of just getting acclimated with it, with the business side of things, something that I wasn't used to with the police department. And having said all this, although it may sound challenging, I don't regret it by any means. And it got me to where I am today within my current company.
Nice. Well, let's switch over to your current company then. So you currently work for Cobwebs Technologies, and you are a web intelligence analyst. So what kind of tasks are you doing?
Well, I am happy to say I am back in that analytical world, and I couldn't be happier. I am back with my homies. I'm back in the mix. So at Cobwebs Technologies, I'm working for an open source platform. The company is an open source platform where my main responsibility is to share what our system can do and help people. And although I'm not part of the sales team, I am part of the sales process in terms of showcasing our platform, and things that I used to do as an analyst can be automated. And now I sound like I'm giving a sales pitch, but a lot of us do really rely on social media for links to certain cases. Are people chattering online about it? Are people at the scene of a crime or a memorial or things like that? Are people talk about things on social media as if no one's looking or no one's watching. And although a lot of people out there do know that, authorities if your platform is open, your account is open, anyone in the world can access it and see it. And where I come into play in terms of my role at Cobwebs Technologies is really helping our clients look at the platform and using it as if I were the end user and I was the analyst. So I work very closely with a lot of our state, local, and federal clients in terms of working cases. So if we have phone numbers given from a cell phone dump, we can help find some identity to those. Working with an agency now that there was a homicide and we've got 2 or 3 suspects, and finding all their social media accounts, see what they're saying, and bringing all that information forward, as a helpful, organized way. A lot of companies and a lot of former analysts, we work with cell phone data and mapping data. I've seen a lot of my friends and colleagues make the leap on what I once called the dark side, coming over to the vendor side. There's a need for the tools that are out there. A lot of these tools help the analysts, the former me, do their job. And it's my job to show them how to do that by using our platform.
So you certainly have a wide variety of experience in companies and departments that you've worked with. And as you go on to these conferences, you're talking with analysts from various departments. It seems to me that the private sector or the vendor sector, or if you want to split those two up, is ultimately where most analysts end up. And that's probably not true. But there's so many that I'd known throughout my time period going to the IACA conferences or going to the IALEA conferences that it seems like that's where they end up. Like it seems like it's a rarity for someone to be an analyst 20 plus years at the same department. Take a Trina Cook, for instance. That's a rarity, it seems.
Dog. She is loyal to her PD. You got to hand it to her. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's not I don't want to say it's not the norm because, what is the norm? And especially as all of these different platforms and technologies, come about, there's always need for people to fill those gaps there and fill those holes and roles within those companies. But there's a lot to be said for the analyst that stays on for 20, 25 years. Maybe it's something where they really, really love what they do. And it's not to say that I didn't or that others that made the leap didn't. Sometimes, personal things in your life make you change courses. But for those of us that did take that leap, I think there's a reason for it. And I know for me personally, I was able to bring my point of view and my expertise to a technology to show why that technology, is needed or how it can be best used, but also how to make it better. I work closely with our R&D team and say, well, an analyst at a federal agency would use the system differently than one of our financial clients, and it's to ensure that the engineers behind the scenes that, they're not using things on the end user side. They're seeing things from a script perspective, and to know the practicality of it is where I come into play and try to make those two things talk to each other between the client and the engineer and just really help them understand what we need as analysts and what we need in law enforcement and why. And then it's their job to kind of execute that. So it's a really cool role in my current company to be able to, try to translate that into both sides of the spectrum.
Let's switch gears now. Let's move on to the IACA. As I mentioned in your intro, you chaired both the election committee and the conference committee. When you look back, is there a particular memory that you have regarding the IACA or maybe a favorite accomplishment that you had?
Yeah, I think my first IACA conference that I attended was in Orlando. We were right across from, I believe, Universal Studios. I believe it was very early 2000s. I was still with Cambridge PD. And I remember going to that conference and, wow, look at all these smart people from all over the country and internationally. Like, what am I doing here? And then fast forward 10, 12 years later, sharing some of the conferences and putting the whole conference together. At the time, I believe it was 2008, we partnered with the Pop Center, and that was in Arlington, Texas, and Carolyn Cassidy was the chair. She asked me to join the team, and I believe I partnered with Mary Craig to be the speakers liaison and arrange all of the speakers for the session. And it was such a sense of accomplishment to when all these moving pieces come together and you're able to step back and see it all work. It's something. And, looking at it from the conference chair perspective, when Bellevue, Washington, and Denver, Colorado, when I chaired with Jennifer Kohner, this was a year-long project. I don't know that a lot of attendees really understand how much work goes on behind the scenes. And you're working with a budget. and you're working with people in different time zones that are on your team, and you're working with hotels and nights out vendors that are, on different time schedules and they have their own priorities, which may not be in line with yours. Then the whole fun part is that you're doing this all with your primary job. This is all from a volunteer perspective, and places like the Pop Center have staff that do this and do only this all year long. And you've got people like us, which is why I think we're such a fantastic organization, that everyone is so passionate about it and really enjoys everything so much that we do it on a volunteer basis. And, I think that the biggest sense of accomplishment was, I believe, in Louisville, Kentucky. That conference at the time, I believe we had broken the threshold of 500 attendees. That was really, really a cool sense of accomplishment to be able to get that high of a number. And that was always our goal, to get more attendees and more attendees. And now my man, Albert Mesa, is the chair, and I know that he has surpassed that number by very much. And I know that having a fantastic location in Vegas, everybody and their mother, I'm sure, will want to come or want to go, I should say. And it's just to be able to give back and to also be able to be trusted in those different roles within the association. I think it's just a really, really cool sense of accomplishment.
Louisville, you just got me thinking there. So the first night of the conference, we had the riverboat tour, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I was coming up from Nashville and I forgot about the time change. So I am literally pulling up as the boat's trying to doing all aboard kind of thing.
I know.
And I had to talk my way past security to let me on because I can't remember what it was. I hadn't registered yet. And so they allowed me, probably shouldn't have, it was breakdown in security. They allowed me on the boat.
And it was worth it, I'm sure.
Yes. But that's my memory from Louisville.
Yeah, Louisville was a great city. And I think that's the really cool thing too, is that you get to go to different locations, within the US, and hopefully for those that are lucky enough to go internationally, and you get to just meet people and learn about their background and see how other people are doing their work, and where you might meet one analyst that's doing more intel work, another one could be doing more tactical, and just exchanging those ideas. It's just such a cool association. And I can go on and on about it, but I've made lifelong friends from it as well. And it's a great association. I'm just so happy that I got involved with it.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite conference?
Oh man, I'd probably say Denver.
Okay.
And I say that because I was able to extend my stay and stay with some friends that I made at the IACA. So Chris Jacoby lives in Denver, and Stacy Belladin at the time lived in Denver. I believe she was still in the Denver area. These are some of the friends that I've made outside of the association. And maybe Scottsdale is my favorite, because that's the first year I got to really become friends with everybody that I'm, consider these lifelong friends. So maybe that was my favorite conference. But, they've all been great, and they all have their own memories that stand out, some at the conference, some after hours.
Yes, yeah. It's funny. You mentioned Albert. Albert and I had the same exact favorite conference.
Oh,
and
yeah?
That was in St. Pete. And it was because it was our first one and we didn't have any other responsibility. We were just there as guests.
Back in a different world.
Yes.
St. Pete was a beautiful location, and I didn't know many people at the time. And, as a newbie analyst and coming to these conferences, the really cool thing I think about our conferences are the opening ceremonies, when we ask how many people are first-time attendees. And I feel like that number gets bigger and bigger each year. And St. Pete, I think that was probably my first conference after my stint with Cambridge. There was a lull that I didn't go to conferences for about 10 years or so. But I got my agency to approve it. I believe I was speaking that year. In fact, I know that I was. So being a speaker at the conference was another accomplishment. But a lot of the, activities that we had for nights out and things like that, I didn't really get involved in. And I remember Mary Craig trying to drag me out, and meeting Matt, Joe from Alexandria at the time, having that Jersey connection always works, and making friends with them. And year after year, you just meet more people and you build those friendships, you build those bonds, and it's a really cool thing that the IACA was able to bring to the table.
Yeah. One of the things about St. Pete I always think about is we owned that hotel for that week.
God, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that was the thing. I mean, we absolutely owned that whole hotel, and it felt like it was just closed down just for the IACA. That's the feeling that we
Now,
had
was
there.
that the first year that we had karaoke?
We didn't have karaoke. I think what happened is there was a little shack that
Yeah.
was in by the pool that had a karaoke night.
Ah,
And I think that's what started it all. I could be wrong on that. Somebody can comment on this recording, and if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's where it started. I don't believe we actually had an event of karaoke, but that was the first. I think everybody was there, that karaoke in group, and it was so much fun that night that it took off from there.
yep. We've had it a lot of years afterwards, that's for sure.
Yeah. So you brought in the idea of first timers to the conference. I guess in a way, I find it troublesome that there are so many first timers. I think in two years ago when we had it in DC, it was over 60%, I think,
Wow.
were first timers, which means it's good in a way, but at the same time, that means we're not getting as many repeat customers, right? And it makes me wonder, do we do enough for experienced analysts to have them want to come to the conference? Or are we only catering to the newbies?
That's an interesting point of view, because I remember when I was on the conference committee, that was always a really high goal, was bringing in new people, bringing in new countries, and really plugging the international part of our association, and that the membership as a whole, or the attendance as a whole to the annual conference, was really heavy within the US. And even that, a lot of our first time attendees were even within the US. But, are we doing enough for our experienced analysts? I don't know. And that's something that I never really gave a lot of thought to, just because the focus was on bringing in those new people. I don't attend the conference anymore as an attendee. I attend as a vendor, as a third party. And I know that there are other analysts that do the same. We got Dawn Clausius and Laura Pettit and Stacey Belladin. There's a lot of former analysts that are now Samantha Gwynn that have made that leap. So in some aspects, we're still there. We're just wearing a different hat. So, and that's not just for all of them, but sometimes it's budgeting issues, which totally stinks, but I'm sure a lot of people are experiencing that as well.
Yeah. And I mean, it is. I mean, and I, as a presenter, I have struggling with coming up with a presentation that I would deem either intermediate or advanced topic.
Right. And, when we have the schedule, or again, when I was on the committee, having those schedules for the advanced, intermediate, beginner topics, having those tracks within the schedule, it's sometimes you'd have a hard time filling one of the tracks, because a lot of the submissions were either really heavy beginner level or really heavy advanced level. And how do you balance that as an organizer? How do you anticipate who the audience is going to be?
Yeah.
So it's definitely grown. The umbrella has definitely gotten wider, but sometimes you got to come back to basics. And those people that have been with the association for 10, 15, 20 years, you could say a lot about how the association itself has grown. But then you talk about the content, and is it relative to today? And you would think that it is, because the analysts are applying to speak, and those sessions that get selected hopefully are speaking to the culture of the analytical world right now. And, hopefully it's kind of checking all the boxes between the beginner level and advanced.
So you were also chair of the election committee. And here's another tough one. How do you get more members to vote?
I don't know. What are they offering now for COVID shots? I think they're offering new cars, right? I mean, is that what we've got to do? Is start giving out free beer and free Teslas? It's a tough one, and it's funny, you talk with the people in the association that you're just friendly with, or and they're all voting, and we're talking about who's going to get our vote, those types of things. But there's so many people out there that are very, very well qualified for positions that either don't want to run, they don't have the free time, and it requires a lot of dedication, a lot of time.
Yes.
And how do you get those other members that always have something to say, but don't voice, they don't share their voice through their vote? And, maybe if people become more involved in the association in other ways, they would understand and appreciate more, like, how their involvement can help progress the association, even if it is just casting your vote or making that nomination. It's tough. I think the first year I chaired the elections committee, about 2 to 3% of the membership voted. And now with us being 4 or 5,000 members, or, I'm not even sure what the numbers are now. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
very small number for representation for 2 to 3%.
It's still about that low.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good, interesting point, though, in that are they not voting because the races aren't interesting, right? If you have people that is, you just assume that one person's going to win, why vote? Some people will take that. Some people will vote no matter what, right?
Yes.
Some people aren't going to vote no matter what. And then you're going to have some people that are only going to vote if it's interesting. And so you bring up a good point. If we don't have two solid candidates where there's a really contrasting style, there's two very different outcomes depending on who wins, you probably are going to have a lower turnout.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And, sometimes that's why people actually won't even run against another person that's up for election or another candidate, because they just assume that other person's going to win.
Sure.
And that's disappointing. And to the same note, one thing I saw in the last election I thought was really cool and really creative, especially if you don't know the people personally or professionally, is sharing the videos, seeing and hearing the person and them speaking and not reading a biography on someone. Although that was our only ways of communicating that at the time when I first got involved, or the most efficient way. Seeing those videos is really cool, and it shows the creativity in some of these candidates. Maybe something like that would get people more involved. It's not that the IACA doesn't promote it or share it or encourage it. It's just, how do we get those people, just like our regular elections, how do we get those people to the booth?
Sure.
And maybe it's, who knows? Maybe it's just promoting more at the conferences. But then again, you're only getting a small percentage of the association or the membership there. Obviously I'm stumbling on my words here and I don't really have a good answer, but I really like the idea of giving out free beer and free Teslas. I mean, if we increase those membership dues, we might be able to get that.
Yeah. I always thought, logistically, it would be a nightmare. And I'm sure Rachel Carson's going to be screaming at me saying this, but I thought it would always be interesting that you tie the election vote to the annual renewal. And so when you renew your membership, you're also voting for whoever's running.
That's very, very creative. I like that. A lot of other things would have to change. And I think Rachel probably is shaking her fist at you. But I like the idea. That's a good way to do that. Or, a pop-up on the website. You sign in, you get the pop-up. You can't go beyond that until you vote. But, then you're going to get those people that are just clicking any button just to get past that. I mean, there's all different scenarios, but that's a good one.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, since we're on topic, we will be, again, doing the election coverage for the podcast. So we will be interviewing all the candidates for the IACA elections.
I thought it was great what you guys did last time, too. I remember listening to Annie and Sam's portion here online. I thought that was great. It was, a different way to get to know these candidates if you don't personally or professionally. And that's, I think, what we were missing a really long time ago. It's obviously gotten better.
Another topic I wanted to talk to you about, and I think you have an interesting perspective on, given your background with the history with the IACA, being in both the public and private sector, is from time to time on the show, we've talked about executive board members and this could be either with the IACA or IALEA or any, association. And it's the idea of being on an executive board, being in a position of leadership, making decisions for an association, and also working for a vendor. Just separating the idea of private sector versus vendor, because if you're an analyst with Walmart or you're an analyst with a security company, you being on the executive board really should not have any issues with conflict of interest. But if you're working for a vendor, that's, a vendor that's at the IACA conference or IALEA conference or any one of these conferences, then how do you secure the idea of you're separating what's best for the association versus your day job working as a vendor promoting that product?
So there's a couple of points to be made to that. So the first goes back to our discussion that we just had in regards to voting, membership getting involved. If you have 2 or 3 candidates that are up for president and you've got one as a civilian analyst and you've got 2 as a quote unquote private sector analyst, get involved, vote. And if you think that there's going to be, something shady going on because, someone runs for president and is also employed by a vendor that is heavily involved in the IACA, then you have the opportunity as a member to make your voice heard and vote. Now, going in a different frame of thought is you trust these people to carry out the roles and responsibilities of that position within the membership. There are bylaws in place. There are duties and responsibilities. And when you vote these people in, you trust that they're going to execute them to their fullest capacity and know that when you're serving on behalf of thousands of members, you're keeping their wants and needs and goals in mind and not that of your company. And you've got to trust the person that you're voting into office within that role to carry that out. I can absolutely see from, a third person perspective why someone might look at me with half of a closed eye if I had run for a position and got voted in. And I'm working with my company who this year is sponsoring the luncheon. That has nothing to do with me, Allison Sullivan. That has to do with my company wanting to be very involved in the association and supporting the analytical community. I sing the praises to my employer. I say this is an excellent association for us to be involved in. And truth be known, he was involved in it prior to my employment. So those are things that other people that, may not know. But I don't think that there should be any kind of limitation for what somebody does or who pays that person's salary. If we really want to get it down to basics in terms of having the opportunity to be part of the executive board, you would like to think that those people are donating their time and volunteering because of the passion that they have for the association and helping it become better and more helpful for the analytical community. And you would hope the people that are running for those positions would really keep that in mind and keep that as their priority. And someone like me, I'm not involved in the sales. So getting my company ahead of the game, I wouldn't be able to do that from that role. And quite honestly, those that have worked with me in my volunteer roles know that I'm very big on the word that's used too much, the transparency angle, and also just the ethics. Going back, I remember the first elections committee that I was on, there was a candidate who was running, and that person came up to me maybe 5 minutes or so before we made the announcement at the annual business meeting. And that person was like, "Man, you really won't let me know, will you?" And I said, "No, I'm not allowed to, and they're like, "Well, the announcement's coming in a few minutes." No, that's not part of the role. They're not allowed to share that information until the business meeting. And right now the business meeting has not started. So, I use as an example of you got to hold true to what that role is. And even though you wear 2 hats, one professionally and one here as a volunteer, you would hope that those volunteers are not using this for personal or, monetary gain in terms of coming from a private side of the house.
Thank you for that answer. That's a real answer. And I always appreciate real answers. You actually got me thinking about something else too about the conference, and you're talking about holding it for the business meeting. And some of these events, though, they struggle with some attendance there, especially at the business meeting and whatnot. And again, I always feel that we got to give the attendees a reason to go. You got to make it box office must see. That's what you have to make sure that it is. So that I think the one year they took out the drawing from the business meeting, and I'm like, well, geez, that was some of the draw of coming to the business meeting, is finding out who won all the awards and who won the drawing and all that other stuff. And then they separated all that, and then it just seems like the business meeting hasn't been well attended since. But I don't know that for sure, though.
Well, I like to stand behind the used and abused saying, if it's free, it's for me. If you want people there, you got to give something away. That's how we entice people, unfortunately. Luncheon during the business meeting, award ceremony, those things, they will get people there and they will get them more involved. And it's cheesy, but it's true. If it's free, it's for me.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So let's finish up with some advice. And what advice do you have for our audience?
Well, I think, we spent some time on newbies, people just entering the field. And I had an experience recently where I was able to speak to a mentee that was referred to me by her mentor. And it was the first opportunity I had to speak with that person and in that kind of role. And I really, really enjoyed it because it showed that a lot of us have a lot to offer to people just entering into this field or wanting to know how to get into the field. And I would say to the current members and for others listening to the podcast that want to get more involved in the field is reach out to anyone's email that you can find and say, this is what I want to do, or this is what I'm doing. And how do I get involved? Who can I talk to? Where are some other resources? And I think that's the biggest thing is just making those connections and reaching out, because you find that a lot of us are really eager to share our stories. Even this podcast, there's sharing our personal views or our background. A lot of us, really want to promote the field and promote the association and everything that comes along with it. And I just say, reach out, get involved. There's always one way or another to learn more about the profession. And a lot of us have a lot to share.
Well, our last segment to the show is Words to the World. And this is where I give the guest the last word. Allison, you can promote any idea that you wish, but what are your words to the world?
Oh my goodness, no pressure on this one, right? So I would say take everything with a grain of salt. Sometimes we're looking at things now on social media, on email, on text, and things can't always be interpreted differently. So take everything with a grain of salt. Don't get too serious about it. Don't overreact. Kind of step back, take a second thought, and have it apply for both your personal and your business life, because sometimes we can jump to conclusions, and that's not the best thing to do.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later. But I do appreciate you being on the show, Allison. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
You as well, Jason. Thanks again. I had a lot of fun today.
Thank you for joining us today on Analyst Talk with Jason Alder. We hope you not only enjoyed the show, but also learned something new. For more information on our guests and information relating to today's topic, please visit our website at leapodcast.com. Special thanks to The Rough and Tumble for our theme song. For more of their music, you can visit their website at theroughandtumble.com. Also thanks to Kyle McMullen for our show logo. For more of his design, please visit his website at moderntype.com. The show is hosted, recorded, and edited by Jason Elder and written by me, Mindy. You can contact us both via the LEA Podcast website. Please join us again next time as we interview another expert in this great field.